Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you back to Midnight Mumbles. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the tale. But before that, please consider giving us a like and subscribing to our channel. The house was searched from top to bottom and back again. An ad hoc rescue team of rapidly sobering partygoers turned the place inside out. We helped, or we pretended to help at least. None of us really thought we were going to find Sadie. We searched closets and cabinets, under the beds, in any container that could potentially contain a person, and even those that could not. We told our story to every adult present at least a half dozen times over, as if they could glean any new information that may have led them to her location. Fear and confusion turned to anger, most of which was directed at us, as though we were somehow responsible. We were raked over the proverbial coals for that bottle of rum Mr. Carmichael had found. Punishments were pending for the very moment the crisis would come to an end. It didn't. Not that night, and not for many to come. Once it had become abundantly clear that Sadie was definitely not in the house, in the yard, or on the roof, the police were called. Mr. Carmichael stayed behind to speak to the cops, and he made me stay too. I was selected, not because I knew anything more than anyone else, but by the pure dumb luck of being closest to him when it came time to nominate our spokesperson. Jeff would have been a somewhat better candidate, but we omitted the fact of his being in the closet with Sadie at the time of her disappearance. The time spent sitting on the couch waiting for the police with Mr. Carmichael was tense, to say the least. He didn't speak a word to me the entire time. He just sat there, chain-smoking his menthol cigarettes and glaring at me with his horrible, red-rimmed eyes. His sleeves were pushed up, and his tie was loosened. His face was red, and his hair was damp and ragged with sweat. He stank of whiskey and fear. I was terrified of him. Despite his wealth and his lofty position, he still managed to look like an angry working-class gorilla who just got laid off and drank himself into a rage. He looked ready to fight the next person to look at him funny, and we were alone together. I tried to say something to him. I have no idea what. I just wanted to cut through the oppressive atmosphere, thicker and more tangible than the cloud of reeking menthol smoke pervading the air of the living room. The doorbell rang. The police were here. "Wait here," he growled, snubbing out his cigarette and rising to his feet. Through the picture window opposite the couch, I could see beams of light dancing every which way in the cul-de-sac. The others were scouring the neighborhood for her. The entire night had taken on a surreal quality from the very moment of Sadie's mysterious disappearance. I knew something that the adults would never admit. Even if they never found a trace of Sadie, which seemed likely, they would never even think it for a moment. There was a word for what had happened here, and it was something I had hoped to experience my entire life up to that point. The word was supernatural. I guess I had romanticized the concept. It wasn't exciting or intriguing or anything else I had expected. It was awful. My friend had vanished, impossibly, from a closet. She wasn't hiding anywhere. She didn't run away. She vanished, in the truest sense of the word. It felt awful. I could hear Mr. Carmichael in the foyer explaining the situation to the police. I couldn't make out what he was saying. He was clearly very keyed up and didn't seem to be of much help. I could hear the softer tones of the police trying to calm him enough that he could file a comprehensible report. It didn't seem to be going well. Finally, he led them into the living room. There were two of them, One guy looked like he was maybe in his early 20s, kind of a baby face, with the thinnest suggestion of a mustache. Short too. I think I was taller than him, and I wasn't a tall kid. He looked like he was playing dress-up in his uniform. The other cop was a woman. She seemed a bit older, stout, and grim-looking. Her hair was pulled back in the sort of severe bun I associated with librarians. They surveyed the room, littered as it was with the detritus of a wild party. There were empty beer bottles, highball glasses, and overstuffed ashtrays covering every available surface. I could feel their judgment, even though it wasn't directed at me. I thought that was shitty. Just because our parents were having a party, that didn't mean it was their fault Sadie had disappeared. From what she told us, it was a long time coming, considering the voices and the sounds from the closet, I mean. The cops sat down on either side of me, and I glanced from one to the other, unsure of which one I should be focusing my attention upon. Finally, one of them spoke. "Hi, Paul," Babyface said. "My name is David Smith, and this is my partner, Doris Montenegro." She nodded grimly and said nothing. "We just have a few questions for you. I know it's late, and you're probably eager to get to bed, so we'll try to make this brief." I hadn't actually thought about it in all of the chaos, but by then it was probably 4 in the morning, and I was completely exhausted. I probably looked about as disheveled as Mr. Carmichael, if not worse. In the course of the search, I was forced to crawl into every nook, cranny, and crawl space deemed too large for adult exploration. I was dimly aware of the fact that I was covered in dust and cobwebs. "Okay," I told them. Officer Montenegro spoke up. "We just need you to describe in your own words what happened tonight. You need to be completely honest with us and omit nothing, no matter how much trouble you think it will cause for yourself, or how irrelevant you may think it is. The safety of your little friend may depend on it. Do you understand?" There was something about her that pissed me off, but I guess that may just be my own anti-authoritarian streak acting up. Then again, maybe I just didn't like the way she called Sadie my little friend, like we were just a bunch of dumb babies. Adults were like that. Somewhere along the way, they forgot what it was like to be our age, and they just thought we were a gaggle of brainless, helpless, subhuman house pets. They thought we couldn't wipe our own asses without their direct supervision. I hated it. I also knew that nothing I told her would increase the odds of their finding Sadie. Not unless the local police department had a paranormal crimes division. On the other hand, I had the feeling that our carefully edited version of the events of the night was far too flimsy for close examination. Mr. Carmichael was standing by, looming in the corner with his cigarette and staring out the window at the search party's activity. If I told them the truth, I knew he would hear what we left out and likely grow furious. To hell with it, I thought, and told them everything. I told them about the scary stories. I told them about the seance. I told them about the rum, and I told them about Spin the Bottle. I told them about 7 minutes in heaven. I told them the most important fact, that we were all watching the door. That Sadie could not have gotten out of the closet without all of us seeing her. Of course, they didn't believe me. Why should they? I had committed the unforgivable crime of being 12 years old and was therefore not to be trusted. They grilled me for some endless span of time, trying to poke holes in my story. They seemed to want so very badly for every one of us to have turned our attention away from the closet long enough for Sadie to slip away. I wouldn't budge. They wanted to perforate my testimony by suggesting we were all so blind, stupid, drunk, that we didn't see her leave. It was always like this. If your story didn't fit the narrative of the assholes in power, be it your parents, your teachers, the police, or the dickhead working at the 7-Eleven, then you were a liar and an asshole, and you got punished, whether you were telling the truth or not, whether you were innocent or not. Well, maybe we were drinking, and maybe we were making out. So what? That didn't change the fact that Sadie walked into that closet and never walked out. I guess I lost my temper. It was late, as I said, and I was scared for my friend and tired of all the bullshit and the accusations. I told the police many things that would do nothing to aid in their search for Sadie. Mostly, I told them what it was and where they could stick it. Mr. Carmichael tried to step in, and I unloaded plenty of ammunition on him as well. Said some stuff I regretted in the cold light of day. I think I said that I was starting to see our parents in a different light. I knew that Carmichael wasn't my enemy. He was just a father who was afraid for his daughter. I knew that he was lashing out at me because he didn't have a real enemy to fight, and he was feeling impotent. Here's the thing, I realized that, and I was smart enough to know that, at least when I had the time to reflect on everything. And I was a kid. He was an adult, a full-grown man. He had decades longer than me to learn how to see things from the other guy's perspective, but he was locked in his own way of thinking. I was 12 years old, and I was dead sick of that kind of person running things. David, the baby-faced cop, diffused the situation. I guess he was still young enough to remember being my age and not wanting to be treated like an idiot and a criminal. He asked me to take him to Sadie's room, while the other cop, Doris, stayed with Mr. Carmichael to help organize the search. I was glad to do it. He was at least willing to act like a human being, and I was eager to get away from the other two. I showed him Sadie's room, and to the best of my ability, I mapped out all of our positions at the time of her disappearance. He didn't say much, or at least he didn't try to poke any more holes. He examined the interior of the closet closely, drawing the same conclusion that we had, that perhaps she had escaped through some secret door. He didn't find anything either. Finally, he just stepped back from the closet and shook his head, eliminating the possibility that we had all somehow missed Sadie's departure from the closet. This was the sort of locked door mystery story that Doyle or Christie might have written. Young as he was, he didn't realize that this story was a better fit. Stephen King. Eventually, I was released to go to bed, while the adults took full control of the situation. Sadie's disappearance made the news, and it seemed that the entire country had gotten involved in the search. Posters with her face dotted the landscape. Every night you could see flashlight beams projecting into every dark corner of the neighborhood and surrounding areas. The Carmichaels were well known and well liked around town, and they had no shortage of volunteers. We returned to school on Tuesday with a sort of strange and unwanted celebrity among the other students. If any sort of education had occurred, I was not aware of it. All I could remember from those terrible, endless hours between the bells were dozens of faces staring at me like I was some curious specimen in a science lab. I was stunned and numb and belligerent and furious and confused and frustrated. Those were the longest days of my life. Every day that I had to get out of bed to face the world knowing that Sadie was still missing was a desperate struggle. All I wanted was for things to go back to normal and for everyone to forget who I was again. The others seemed to feel much the same as I did. In a way, it brought us all closer together. We were all we had against the world. Time together alone was the only peace we had. We talked about that night non-stop, but no one had any answers. Jill blamed herself for what had happened and took it the hardest. She missed a lot of school, wouldn't answer the phone most of the time, and sometimes when I did see her, I could smell alcohol on her breath. Jeff and I worked hard to spend time with her. Neither of us would say so, but we were worried. There was a bandage on her forearm that looked ominous. By the second week, people were starting to give up hoping to find her. No one told us so, of course. No, to our faces, the adults, the parents. They put on their ghoulish, brave faces and assured us that Sadie would be found safe any time now. But when we walked in suddenly while they were talking, they shut up fast. Midway through the second week, we all stopped going to school. Our featured roles in the freak show had all become too much to bear. I heard my name and Sadie's name in whispered conversations everywhere I went. Speculation had grown like some strange tumor. Everyone had their pet theory, and most of those theories revolved around the six of us being co-conspirators in a heinous murder plot. It was infuriating, and so I guess I didn't help matters much when I made a big, ugly scene in the cafeteria on the second Wednesday, following her disappearance. I overheard some guy I didn't even know, I think his name was maybe Craig or Chris, telling another kid that Sadie rejected me, so I had my friends hold her down while I cut her throat. I responded by throwing a bowl of hot chicken noodle soup in his face and breaking his glasses and nose. My departure from school was therefore not entirely voluntary. I felt really bad about it in retrospect, but I guess you could say I was under a lot of strain at the time. That Thursday, I was sitting in my room alone, angrily throwing a foam basketball against the closet door, which I had not opened since that night. Closets were sort of a tender subject. Thankfully, my clothes were all in a dresser, or I would have been stuck wearing the same outfit from the party for the past week and a half. I could hear the phone ringing downstairs, but I didn't pay it much mind. I wasn't allowed to talk on the phone, just one of the many statutes that defined my grounding for that whole lunchroom assault. Mom answered. I could hear the tones of her voice through the vent in my floor, but not the specific words. I threw the ball again. Thump. Before my mandatory vacation from school, I had visited the library in hopes that I might find some explanation, or at least some precedent, for what had happened to Sadie. Surely, I reasoned, she couldn't have been the only person ever to disappear out of thin air. I wasn't wrong. In the 1500s, the entire first English settlement in North America, about 115 people, disappeared without a trace. That wasn't the same situation, though. There are a million possible reasons they could have vanished. The mystery is that no one knows what that reason might have been. No one was there when they disappeared. In the 1870s, a ship, the Mary Celeste, was found adrift and deserted in the Atlantic Ocean. The cargo and the crew's personal effects were all found undisturbed, but of the captain and crew there was not a trace. No sign of any of them had ever been found, but they were missing a lifeboat. Just one, sure. That could have meant that the boat was abandoned for some reason and that the survivors were simply lost at sea. Such things happen. On Christmas Eve, 1945, a fire broke out in the home of a West Virginia family, the Sodders. Mr. and Mrs. Sodder and 4 of their children escaped the blaze unharmed. The remaining 5 children were never found. That must have been a kidnapping and arson. They were never found, but no one marked their departure. No one was there to see them vanish, like we were. You see, people disappeared all the time. Sometimes it was strange and mysterious, but only because no one knew the facts. Even if we don't know the truth, there's still at least a reasonable theory for what must have happened. There was no reason here, no theories, only a mystery. I thumbed through dozens of books and countless stories, just like those three. Only a few were as mysterious and inexplicable as our own. I studied them intensely for any sort of clue that might help us recover Sadie. They were fascinating, but ultimately unhelpful. Apparently, sometime in the 1870s in England, a man bet his friends he could run 16 miles to the next town without stopping. To ensure his honesty, his friends followed him closely in a horse-drawn buggy. Somewhere along the way, they saw him trip and pitch forward and simply wink out of existence right before their eyes. He was never seen again. Only a few years before our own incident, in the early autumn of 1989, a couple was walking hand in hand through a wooded path at Lake Ray Roberts near Denton, Texas. The man, whose name was William Avery, said his girlfriend let go of his hand for just a moment and said, "Hello, little girl," to someone. When he looked to see who she was talking to, he found that she was gone. He didn't see any little girl either. The common theme was this: the person who disappeared under mysterious circumstances was never seen again. Kidnapped, killed, or otherwise, they were gone for good. The only thing I took away from all my research was a dreadful certainty that the same would be said for Sadie Carmichael. Just another unsolved mystery for geeks like me to obsess over. Lost in rumination over these stories, I was startled by a tapping at my second-story window. It was after dark. I crossed the room to find the source of the noise and was startled yet again when I saw something small hit the glass. I opened the window and looked down the ground below. Jeff and Jill were standing below in the shadow of the oak tree in the yard. I waved them up. It was as easy to shimmy up the tree to my window as it was at Sadie's house. There was a risk that my mother would come up to check on me, but I didn't much care at that point if I got in more trouble. Music was not expressly forbidden in my grounding, so I put the Green Day tape on at a volume low enough to avoid attention, but loud enough to muffle our voices. Jill entered first, and Jeff shortly thereafter. They sat on my bed. Both of them wore the same grave, hollow-eyed expression I saw in the mirror. Jeff broke the silence, glancing at the pile of open books on my floor and asking me, "So, did you find anything useful?" "Useful?" I answered. "No, nothing useful. I've read through all of the books in the library I thought would have anything that could help us. Nothing. Bone dry. I found plenty of stories of disappearances as weird as ours, but nothing about someone finding a way to get the vanished person back. What about you, Jill? Did you find anything on the World Wide Web?" In 1993, the internet was in its infancy. Commercial internet providers were just starting to become available, and in those days, the users were sort of like pioneers. They were the early adopters, mostly tech geeks and obsessives. It wasn't like today, where you could pull up Wikipedia and search for whatever you wanted to know in a flash. It was the days of news groups, and the very first web browser had just appeared. Finding information was more of a miserable slog. Jill had access to the web because, in some way too obscure for her to explain, that was how her father made his living. He forced her to learn all of the intricacies of its use because he had this idea that in a few years, everyone would be connected to the World Wide Web, and a working knowledge of it would give her an advantage over the rest of her generation. Of course, his prophecy proved true, but at the time she detested spending all of those tedious hours learning about all that nerd crap. She rolled her eyes and said, "The only thing I found on the web was a cadre of dweebs who were so fascinated that I was a girl that they would pretend to have any sort of information I could ever want. It took me hours to learn that no one knew a darn thing that could ever be described as useful. I still have a headache from staring at that stupid screen." One guy said my story reminded me of something he read once about fairies or something, but he said that it was something to do with babies, and he only ever heard about it happening in England. "Well?" Jeff asked. "Did he say anything else?" Yeah, he did," Jill said, scowling. "He said he was lonely and wanted to know if I would have cybersex with him in a private chat room. I told him I would rather stab myself in the crotch with a Christmas tree, and then I logged off. The World Wide Web is full of pathetic perverts. Probably all look like my dad too. Fat, bald, and badly in need of a bath. I didn't hear the last part because I was laughing too hard at the Christmas tree line. That might have been the first time I laughed since Sadie disappeared. I guess I needed it. When my laughter subsided, a silence fell over us all. I remembered my mother downstairs and listened, for fear that she heard my mirthful outburst and was coming to put a stop to it. Nothing. "So what are we going to do?" Jeff asked quietly. "Well," I said cautiously, "I have an idea, but maybe you're not going to like it." Jeff and Jill looked at me curiously, but said nothing. I took it as encouragement. "Okay, so maybe this is grasping at straws, but consider this. Everything we did that night, the stories, the candles, the Ouija board, the shared drink, and the, coupling." "Yeah?" Jill asked. I thought she had an inkling of what I was driving at. She, out of any of us, might have known. Jeff wouldn't have, but he was a close enough friend that I knew he wouldn't laugh it off. "Well," I continued, "I mean, maybe this is dumb, but in a way, all of that was sort of like a ritual." Jill lit up. I think I was broaching a subject she herself had given much thought. She said, "There's more to it than just that. First of all, there were 7 of us there. 7 is a powerful number, at least if you subscribe to numerology. I don't, necessarily, but the number 7 comes up again and again when it comes to magic and religion and all of that stuff. Maybe it's insignificant, but maybe it's not. The other thing is, we did all of that stuff between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m. That's the witching hour. The witching 3 hours, more like," Jeff said dubiously. "It's a sort of loose term, I guess," Jill admitted. "Christians considered that time to be unholy because it was the time when no one was praying. They used to execute women seen outside at that hour because men are scum, and I guess they thought that was a good enough reason to assume someone was a witch. At any rate, it's considered the time of night, where the spirit world is closest to ours." "Okay," Jeff said, still dubious, but not mocking. "But how does this help us?" Jill yielded the floor to me, as it was my idea in the first place. She was just the resident expert on witchcraft and other strangeness. "My thought is this. If we did perform a ritual that made Sadie disappear, maybe there's a way to undo the ritual if we can recreate the conditions that caused it in the first place. Maybe we can undo the spell or whatever. It's a long shot, but it's the only idea I have. What do you say? Jeff snapped his fingers and said, "What about those weird sticks you brought? The stuff we were supposed to burn if things got too hinky." "Oh, the sage," Jill said. "I forgot all about that. It's probably still in her room. That could help, but I think it's really more for dispelling evil spirits. So what else can we do? Do you have anything else to undo a ritual?" I asked. I felt energized, like we were finally getting somewhere. Maybe it was all just a fantasy, and I was buying into it because I watched too many bad movies and read too many bad books, but it felt right. A strange situation called for strange solutions. Jill sighed. "You guys understand I'm not a witch, right? This is all speculation for me. I know a fair amount about all of this. It's interesting to me. But as far as I know, rituals and spirits and all of that crap are just made up by other weirdos." Jeff and I had nothing to say to this. We were all just scared kids grasping at straws. We were still young enough to believe that magic might exist, but old enough to know that it probably didn't. The Green Day tape ended, and I flipped it to the B-side. Jill sighed again. "Okay, I'll see what I can figure out. Jeff, you get the others together. I don't know if we need everyone together again, but it couldn't hurt. Paul, I guess you better just keep a low profile. You're no good to us if you get yourself double grounded." "Wait," I said, realizing something fairly important. "How are we going to get back in there?" "Easy," Jeff said. "Through the window, just like Jill did when she brought the Ouija board." "Not so easy," Jill said. "I locked the window behind me. I'm going to have to find some excuse to get into her room so I can unlock it for us. That shouldn't be a problem, though. I'll just tell them I left something in there." "Do you think they'll let you?" Jeff asked. Mr. Carmichael seemed pretty pissed off. "I'll manage," Jill assured him. "If he gives me any trouble, I'll just start bawling. That usually works." "All right, so we have something resembling a plan," I said. "So when are we going to do this?" "I think it should be Saturday night," Jill said. "That's exactly 2 weeks from the night she disappeared. We should try to time it down to the minute if we can." 2 weeks, Jeff mused. 14 days, 7 and 7. We hashed out a few more details, but the bulk of our plan relied mostly on Jill's knowledge of spells and rituals, as limited as that may have been. Within minutes of resolving the date of our operation, they departed, leaving me alone with my foam rubber ball and my fears. For the next couple of days, I was in the dark. It was pure luck that my mom didn't catch us meeting together in my room, and I wasn't willing to risk things further by arranging or allowing another meeting. For all my anxiety, I couldn't sit still or concentrate on anything for more than a couple of moments at a time. I would have given anything just to be able to walk down the sidewalk and clear my head. My eyes kept wandering out the window to the Carmichael's house. Saturday, just as darkness fell, and still hours before our little operation would commence, I caught sight of Eliza sitting at her window. She was dressed this time, of course. Eliza stared up at the night sky and paid little mind to the likes of me, just another despondent stargazer. Even from the distance that separated us, I could see her cheeks shining from the tears running down her face. After a time, she turned away, and so did I. Sadie was my friend, and I wanted her back. I was terrified for her safety, and just so confused and frightened about the whole thing. I couldn't sleep, or eat, or even just act like a functioning human being. Jill wasn't the only one who blamed herself for what happened. I just didn't know it at the time. I thought I knew what it was to suffer and feel loss, but seeing Eliza up there weeping for her lost sister, I knew that what I was feeling was nothing compared to what her family must have been going through. They must have been fighting tooth and nail just to hold on and not give up hope that Sadie could be alive. This plan of ours to reverse the ritual and bring her back, I knew it was laughable. We were just kids playing at something we didn't understand in the slightest. I also knew I had to try something, anything. The only thing about which I was certain was that Sadie was somewhere a search party would never find her. We had to bring her back from somewhere outside of a rational, numbered world. No one else would. I told my mother I was turning in somewhere around 10 p.m. that night. To support the illusion, I turned out the lights and laid in bed, not sleeping, but waiting. At least that was my plan. Certainly, I thought I was too keyed up to sleep, until I found myself waking to the sound of tapping at my window. A silhouette stood out against the night sky, and I jumped from my bed before realizing it was only Jeff, with my heart still thumping from the scare. I opened the window and crawled through. I was already wearing dark clothing in anticipation of our nocturnal operation. We climbed down the tree to the ground in complete silence. The moon shone brightly that night, making a mockery at our attempts at stealth, or so I felt. We crossed the yards to the tree that would take us to Sadie's room. Jill, Ashley, Ashton, and Khalil were gathered underneath, trying to look inconspicuous. No one was shouting or shining a flashlight in our faces, so I suppose they were successful enough. It was the witching hour, and all good Christians were in their beds asleep. Nobody here but us witches. Without a word, we all climbed up the tree and into Sadie's room. It seems Jill's mission went off without a hitch. I was almost as glad as I was scared of getting caught. Jill, with her bag of ritual supplies, went in first, and the rest followed. I climbed up last, taking note that Eliza's window was illuminated. I could not, however, see if she was seated at her window again. I supposed I would know soon enough, one way or the other. By the time I crawled through Sadie's window, her room was already lit, though dimly, by a trio of candles. A rolled-up towel was placed at the bottom of her bedroom door to keep light from escaping into the hall. That was a smart move on Jill's part. I wouldn't have thought of that. The others were gathered in a loose semicircle around the Ouija board, shadows playing over their grim faces. The closet door was still closed. I thought I was going to throw up. Seeing the room again for the first time in 2 weeks, I realized I had dreamed of this moment. In my dream, I could hear Sadie weeping inside the closet, desperate and afraid. I tried to tell her I would help her, but my lungs had no air to push the words out. I tried to cross the room to throw open the door, but it felt like I was walking through wet cement. Every step seemed to take eons. When finally I reached her closet door and threw it open, I found her inside, long dead, gray, dry skin stretched over bones. What was left of her face was contorted in agony. Her yellow teeth were bared in her final cries for help that would come far too late. The inside of the closet door was furrowed with deep scratches. The scratches were streaked with rust-colored stains that could only have been dried blood. Her nails were embedded in the wood, ripped free from her fingertips. Instead of throwing open the closet door, I simply sat with the others. I was too afraid to see what might have been inside. Nothing or something, both possibilities frightened me equally. "Let's begin with the seance," Jill suggested. She spoke in a barely audible whisper. If we can get in contact with Sadie that way, we may be able to help her find her way back. Is everyone ready? We all nodded our agreement, some more readily than others. I have no idea how Jill and Jeff managed to convince everyone to return, to say nothing of attempting another seance. Actually, that's not true. I knew how. It was Sadie. We all loved her. We all wanted her back. The small chance of success was worth all the risk. One by one, we stretched our hands toward the planchette and rested 2 fingertips on its surface. With this done, we stared up at Jill in anticipation. There was no question that she would be leading the seance. Spirits, Jill began, still whispering, but addressing the room. Her head was thrown back, and her arms were stretched up toward the ceiling, her palms out. Spirits, we beseech you, if our friend Sadie is among you, let her speak to us. Sadie, will you speak to us? We stared intently at the board, trying not to will an answer, but simply to concentrate on the question. That's what Jill said to do the first time around. We stared and concentrated. Nothing. The planchette moved not an inch in any direction. Confused, we all started to mutter softly to one another until we were cut off by a severe gesture by Jill. Jill opened her mouth to ask another question, but she was interrupted by a voice so loud I thought at first it must have been Eliza. "Hello?" the voice cried out. We all jumped back, ready to scatter before the bedroom door could open. Ashton's hands were already on the window frame when the voice called out again. "Jeff, where did you go?" It came from the closet. "Sadie?" Jeff and at least 2 of the others called out. I said nothing. I was speechless. "Yes, it's me. Duh," she said, throwing open the closet door. She looked exactly the same as she did that night, apart from hair that appeared tousled from Jeff's hands. She glared at Jeff and said, "How the hell did you get out of the closet so fast? I know I'm not that bad at kissing, so what gives? And why are you all dressed like ninjas?" Well, Ashley was the first to find her voice and said, "Sadie, what the hell happened? We were so worried about you. Where did you go?" I think Sadie was starting to ask Ashley just what the heck she meant, but Ashley smothered her with a hug before she had the chance. Ashton followed closely behind, then Jeff, Khalil, and Jill. I was the last to break my shock paralysis, but Sadie jumped away as soon as my arms wrapped around her. "Okay, get off of me, all of you," she yelped. She addressed us all, but she was staring at me when she said it. Or rather, she was staring at my wrist, the only part of my body to come into contact with her. Feeling hurt and uncomfortable, I adjusted the bracelet I wore on that wrist, cast iron beads on a leather cord. The others bombarded her with questions, but I guess in all the excitement, we forgot to be quiet. The door flew open, the overhead light clicked on, and there stood Mr. Carmichael. He had a shotgun in his hand, and his eyes were blazing. "What in the Sam hell is going on in here?" he bellowed. "I damn near blew all your goddamn heads off. What are you doing?" His jaw dropped, having noticed Sadie standing among us. "Hi, Daddy," she said with a flippant little wave. "Sadie," he cried, shoving the shotgun into my arms and rushing to her. "Doodlebug, where have you been?" "I've been here, Daddy," she said, looking as perplexed as when she first stepped out of the closet. "I've been here all night." With tears of relief rolling down his face, Mr. Carmichael held Sadie to his barrel chest, repeating her name over and over again. From behind them, Eliza and Mrs. Carmichael emerged, tentatively at first, and then with the same gusto Mr. Carmichael had shown. they all smothered a baffled Sadie in their affections, while we stood by feeling like someone's third wheel collection. "Yo, we should go," Khalil suggested. We nodded and began to slip away. It was at this time that Mr. Carmichael remembered we were there, or perhaps his relief subsided just enough to remember to be angry again. His face began to redden before he even started yelling. "So maybe you guys want to tell me what the hell happened here? The 6 of you were here with my daughter when she disappeared, and now you 6 are here when she comes back. Would you care to explain that?" "Huh?" Jeff spoke up. "Mr. Carmichael, we don't know what's going on. You just what?" Mr. Carmichael cut him off. "You just thought you'd play a fucking joke on my family. Is that it? You sneak my daughter out of here, pretend like she fucking disappeared, give my family the scare of our lives, then sneak her back in here like nothing happened. Do you think that's funny or something? Funny joke." "It's not a joke, sir," Ashley cried, tears running down her face. She didn't respond well to getting yelled at. Ashton threw an arm over her shoulder and added, "We didn't do anything, sir. We just wanted to." He trailed off. There wasn't an explanation we could give that would sound sane. We were all standing around a Ouija board and 3 guttering aromatherapy candles. Sadie was alive and well, and nowhere near the spirit world. "You just wanted to what?" Mr. Carmichael bellowed. "Never mind. I don't want to hear it. You get your devil board and get the fuck out of my home. I don't want to see a one of you around here again. You understand me? And right after I call the police and tell them my baby girl is safe and sound, you better believe I'm going to tell each and every one of your parents. Now get the fuck out of here." We didn't need an engraved invitation. That was for damn sure. The 6 of us scrambled out of that house as fast as our feet could carry us. I was almost out the door before I realized I still had the shotgun in my arms and set it on the coffee table before dashing out the door. I caught up with Jill and Jeff before sneaking back up to my room. The others had already scattered, back to their respective homes to face the music. "So that was weird," I said. "It was like she didn't even know any time had passed," Jill said. "Definitely weird." 2 weeks, Jeff said. "How did she not, die of thirst?" "No idea," I said. "She didn't look any worse for wear, that's for damn sure." "Did you catch a whiff of her breath, though?" Jill asked. We shook our heads. It smelled like she was living off a steady diet of dead mice and dog crap. I thought I was going to throw up. I laughed, but Jeff didn't. Jeff looked more troubled than ever, as if her grotesque analogy sparked a disturbing memory for him. "I gotta go, guys," he said and dashed off for his house. "I guess I better go too, Paul," Jill said. "I guess you'll be grounded for life after tonight, huh?" "Yeah," I said, rubbing the back of my head. "But this is good, right? Sadie's back, safe and sound. I don't know if we did anything to make it happen, but at least everything can go back to normal. No more freak show." "Totally," Jill said, slapping my shoulder. "I'll see you when you break free, dude." "Yeah." I said, "I'll see you then." She turned away, leaving me alone. I stared up at the moon. It was full that night, a bright silver coin in the sky. If Sadie was back, safe and sound, then why didn't I feel like everything was all right? Why didn't I feel like anything was all right? As you could probably imagine, I caught all 31 flavors of holy hell from my parents when they heard from Mr. Carmichael. I never went back into the house. I just sat on the front porch and waited to hear the uproar. They subscribed utterly to Mr. Carmichael's version of the events, and in between screaming damnation at me, they bombarded me with questions I couldn't possibly answer to their satisfaction. The sun was rising when the riot act had finally been read out in its entirety. The gist of my further punishments were as follows. 1. I was now grounded for an additional month. 2. I would have no contact with Sadie for the indefinite future. This was at Mr. Carmichael's insistence. 3. I would not be allowed to take driver's ed or otherwise pursue my driver's license until I turned 18. And 4. Upon my return to school, any grade I received below a B+ would result in further grounding and revocation of privileges to be defined if and when they occur. I considered these punishments to be an outrage and bullshit of the highest order. The one that stung the most was being cut off from Sadie. I had a million questions to ask her. They buzzed through my mind endlessly like angry bees. I was dying of curiosity. More than that, though, I just missed my friend. That she had returned to us was a huge relief. I was glad for that, but to be denied contact was just cruel. The hell of it is, I couldn't blame them entirely. I knew their anger arose from laboring under false pretenses. The only answer they had was that we had, for some unknowable reason, spirited Sadie away in some sort of hideout, just to mess with them. They thought we would let the whole town go into an uproar, conduct a massive search, lie to the police, the media, make fools of everyone, just for a childish prank. Why would we do that? But there were no other answers. We didn't give them any, at least. What could we say? We didn't know anything ourselves, apart from those few facts that were to us undeniable. Sadie entered that closet with Jeff, and Jeff left the closet without her. For 2 whole weeks, she was simply gone. No one, Sadie included, knew where she might have been. At the end of those 2 weeks, she emerged from that closet, believing, or claiming to believe, that no time had passed. Those facts provided no answers, only more questions. Our parents didn't even have that to fall back on. The only point at which they had to cling was that we were all present when she disappeared, and we were all present when she reappeared. Thus, we were to blame. Ipso facto. It was maddening. Maddening. All of my life, as far back as I could remember, I had been fascinated by real-life mysteries. Just like this. Ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, the Bermuda Triangle, unsolved murders. I read all about them. I wished again and again that I could experience something so strange and unusual. Well, here I was. The strangest thing I would probably ever encounter, sitting right next door, and I couldn't leave my room. How was I supposed to deal with that? With nothing else to do, I spent hours with my desk pushed up to the window, watching the Carmichael house for any clues to what may be happening within. I scribbled pages of notes, but they were mostly obsessive ramblings. I didn't see anything. Of course, the only window I could see clearly was Eliza's, and that vantage point quickly became distinctly unhelpful. Sunday night, she had caught me staring up at her window. We locked eyes, and she slowly began unbuttoning her blouse. My jaw dropped, and in that frozen moment, I thought of something apart from the mystery of Sadie. Only instead of bearing the goods to me, she stopped halfway through and flipped me the old double juice, both birds, and a quick closing of her curtains. She hadn't opened them since. Despite her efforts, I was provided the one and only clue to Sadie's well-being. All my spying produced. Just before the curtains closed, I saw her there. She was in Eliza's room, looking right over her shoulder. I'm not even sure Eliza realized she was there yet. I didn't see much. It was only a split second after all. But I did notice something. Sadie's hair was a rat's nest. It was usually perfect, not a strand out of place. Strange, but probably meaningless. She had been through a lot, and slipping up on grooming wasn't exactly unheard of in situations like that. My only other link to the outside world, at least until my suspension ended in a few days, were the letters left taped to my window. The others were in almost as much trouble as I was, but they had school to meet up at and time to compare notes. Jill would condense all their discussions into these letters and leave them surreptitiously in the middle of the night. The first letter read as follows. Dear prisoner, number 808-135. Haha, boobies. How goes your incarceration? Mine proceeds apace. My parents don't seem to understand I'm happier in my room, with my books, my music, and my beloved isolation. I hope I stay grounded forever. Just kidding. Sort of. From what I gather, the others are making do in their own ways. Ashton painted a beautiful portrait of his sister lounging on her bed. Did you know he painted? Khalil's parents have kept him too busy to be bored. I saw him yesterday mucking out the gutters and repainting all the shutters. That rhymes. I'm a poet, and heretofore I was unaware of the fact. I'm not sure what Jeff has been doing to while away the hours. I asked him, and in response, he grinned and made a jerking off gesture. I doubt he's been waxing the old beanpole this entire time, but who can say? My guess is that he is waging a grand war with all of his old G.I. Joe dolls. Well, that's enough small talk, I suppose. You must be wondering about the status of Sadie following her miraculous reappearance. Sadly, I do not have much to report. She did not come into school today. The good news is that word of her safe return to this plane of existence has reached the other students. We have all been grilled thoroughly for details of the execution of our amazing prank, and I assure you, it never gets old. Just kidding. It's already about as old as Ronald Reagan's pubes. I guess the good news is that you, Mr. Soup Bowl Assault, get to miss all of it. Actually, school aside, not a one of us has seen hide nor hair of any of the Carmichaels. I suppose now is the time for privacy and healing, or something. I'm sure you have been keeping your own surveillance, and if the answers are written on Eliza's titties, please do let us know. I will continue to post these dispatches if and when new information arises, or if I'm bored and feel like writing a letter. My sister sent me a tape labeled Meat Puppets, but I'm not allowed to listen until I'm ungrounded. Blah. Your partner in crime, Jillian Estelle Peters. Hours passed. I was so bored I did the reading assignment, which was Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I've never really enjoyed the reading our teachers thought would enrich our growing minds, and so I didn't expect much from this one. It surprised me. The story of children marooned on a deserted island and their gradual, or in some cases, not so gradual, descent into savagery dug its hooks into me and wouldn't let me go. I read it cover to cover in that endless second day. I guess I disagreed with the message Golding seemed to be forcing upon the reader. See, it seemed like to him civilization was equal to goodness, that morality and civilization were inexorably tied. Savagery, he maintained, was evil. Was it though? Civilizations made wars. Civilizations created wealth and poverty. Civilizations made slaves of lesser civilizations. It seemed to me that civilizations never lost savagery. They mastered it. I could make that argument in the paper I would have to write, but would my teacher accept it? Teachers, parents, they were the masters of the lesser race. Us, their children, their students. If I wrote a paper spouting ideas like that, I'd get an F. Probably I would. Piggy, I guess he was the paragon of society. Piggy was a wet blanket who wouldn't adopt the new paradigm. Total savagery. He died for it, and I guess that's tragic. He was just a kid, after all. But what was the point then? That in the vacuum of the greater civilization, we must hold to its tenets, even if they serve no purpose in the wild, even if they hold no value in survival. The savage children hunted the wild boar. They provided sustenance. They sustained life. What would Piggy have done? Held a town hall meeting discussing the possibility of hunting game and the ethical quandary of preying on the lowly beasts of the wild. I don't know. Maybe I saw it all wrong. Maybe this was the wrong time to be reading a story like that, while I was angry at my parents and adults in general for what I felt was unjust treatment. I started and trashed my report 3 times before I decided I would try again later when I had more time to let the material sink in, more time to reflect. The next morning, I found another letter from Jill taped to the window. It read as follows. Hello again, Paul. Dying of boredom. I stole that Meat Puppets tape while my parents were out. They either have way too much trust in me, or they didn't care enough to hide it. Weird stuff, but I like it. I like it a lot. Can't wait to listen to it with you. Plateau is probably my favorite track so far. Had to turn it off before the end so I could get it back downstairs before they returned. School still sucks. Everyone else is bored but fine. Blah blah blah. Not much to report. Oh, Julian. You know Julian Moreno? During social studies, he cut one. So heinous, we all had to flee into the hall until the stench dissipated. Everyone was certain he crapped his pants. I almost threw up. At least that distracted people for a couple of hours. Still getting grilled about Sadie. What about Sadie, you ask? Well, no one has seen her. Still, no one has seen any of the Carmichaels. Still, what are they up to in there? Even Eliza is staying home. Why? They're in there, I can tell you that with a fair degree of certainty. Their cars are in the driveway. For one. For two, you can see them sometimes behind the curtains, moving around. For three, there's Khalil's story. If you can believe it. Yesterday after school, he told me, his parents sent him over to the Carmichaels to apologize for breaking into their house and all the other things they're so sure we did. Khalil didn't care. He was no stranger to issuing apologies. He didn't really mean, you know, his personality. So he goes over to the Carmichael's house, knocks on the door. Nothing. Knocks again. Nothing. He's about to turn and leave when he sees Mr. Carmichael's head silhouetted through the window on the door. What do you call those door windows? Oh, who cares? Through the door, Khalil heard Mr. Carmichael ask, "Who is it? Who's there? Go away." Khalil said he sounded weird. Real weird. He said it was hard to describe. He could tell it was Mr. Carmichael talking, but sounded wrong. Not like he was sick, exactly. Not gravelly or phlegmy or anything like that. The closest thing he could come up with was that it sounded like Mr. Carmichael recorded all the words he said in advance, one by one, and cut them together. You know how your speech has a certain rhythm to it. I think it's called cadence. I think what Khalil was trying to say was that Carmichael's speech had no cadence, or else the cadence was all wrong. Does that make sense? So anyways, Khalil was kind of thrown off, but he wasn't going to go home without giving an apology, or his parents would flip out. So he said something like, "Mr. Carmichael, it's me, Khalil. I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say I was sorry for everything." He only got part of that out. Carmichael cut him off with that same funky, no-cadence speaking voice. He said, "Khalil, stay away from here, you and all your friends. Sadie doesn't want to see you. Ever. You've done bad." That's word for word what he said, at least according to Khalil. You know how he exaggerates. Well, Khalil still wasn't put off. Half of it was him still wanting to get the apology in. Reading between the lines, I think Khalil really was sorry about all the trouble. He jokes around a lot, but he's a good guy. He just wants everyone to be friends, to like each other, even the parents. The other half was Sadie. He just wanted to see that she was doing okay. He's sweet on her, you know, like half the school is. So one last time he tried. He said, "Mr. Carmichael, please can I just come in for a minute? I just want to have a quick talk, and then you never have to see me again." He got about half of that out before Carmichael dropped the real bomb, the showstopper. Now, I wouldn't repeat this if I didn't think Khalil was telling the whole truth. You know that, right? He said, "Get out." Black N-word, get out. Like I said, it's hard to believe. You know Mr. Carmichael. He doesn't have a racist bone in his body, right? Mr. Watkins is one of his closest friends. How could he possibly say something like that? But he did say it. Khalil swears he did, and he was so upset. He wouldn't joke about that. This is really messed up. I have no idea what's going on, and I'm really worried about Sadie. Eliza too. Sadie had to go somewhere, right? Maybe there's something about her parents we didn't know. Maybe they abused her. I don't know how she could have disappeared like that, but maybe she slipped out somehow. I can't figure it out, but I think she ran away and her parents found her and dragged her back. Does that make sense? Would her parents pretend she was still gone and hold her prisoner in her room? Did we spoil something by finding her there? There are holes in that story. I know, but it's like a puzzle with some of the pieces missing. It would make sense and come together if we had those missing pieces. Well, I guess that's it, and now my hand is cramping. I'll write again if anyone else learns something. Your friend and confidant, Miss Gillian Agatha Peters. I read and reread that letter dozens of times over the course of that day. In the interim, I wrote a report about Lord of the Flies. That was mostly bullshit, but I thought was what Mrs. Clark wanted to hear. I had plenty of other work too, and I slogged through all of it. It wasn't easy, and I can't say I did a great job on any of it, but I didn't intend for this suspension to lead to flunking and getting left back. All the while, though, my eyes kept darting back to that letter. What did it mean? How could Mr. Carmichael say something like that? What is going on here? Would we ever find out? My mind was this horrid tangle of possibilities. The Carmichaels have been family friends my whole life. Longer. Sadie has been my friend since we were both running around in diapers. If she was being abused, why didn't she tell us? How did we not notice? That was only one possibility, though. Maybe it was the likeliest possibility, but I still couldn't make sense of it. What else then? Of course, I had a million ideas, most of them variations on the film Invasion of the Body Snatchers. All of them were ludicrous and improbable. Or so I decided. I had been spending too much time alone in my room with nothing to distract me, schoolwork, and something that would most likely seem a lot less mysterious in the fullness of time, when everything went back to normal. I was naive enough then to think that everything would always eventually go back to normal. I know better now, but I shouldn't get ahead of myself. That was the final day of my week's suspension. The next day, I would get to leave the house, if only to attend my classes and go straight home. I never thought I would be so happy to get to go to school. It was a sickening feeling. I waited until midnight to see if Jill would leave another dispatch. No such luck. Ditto that morning at 6, when I dragged myself out of bed. I was disappointed, but not entirely surprised. She would see me at school and give me the lowdown then surely. I was expecting more vague strangeness, but not the bombshell I received. It would be a few hours before I would see her. Unlike the rest of us, she didn't take the bus. Her dad took her to school every day before work. It was supposed to be a sort of bonding time between the two of them. I guess. She hated it, of course. Well, she said she hated it. I knew better. She loved her dorky parents. It was just that showing it didn't really mesh with the image she was trying to convey. I received a warm welcome from all the others. Jeff, Ashton, and Khalil had a banner prepared for me, which read, "Welcome back, Psycho." It came complete with a caricature of me smashing the face of Craig Chris with the soup bowl. I never lived that down. Until I graduated high school, the other students would feign terror every time the cafeteria served soup. People I hardly remember still call me Soup Psycho or Soup Nazi every now and again. The nickname switched when the Seinfeld episode came out in '95. I won't say that day was great or even enjoyable. Actually, it was terrible. First of all, it was school. School is always terrible. Secondly, I had to see the counselor during study hall to discuss my anger problems. I told her I didn't have anger problems. I had asshole problems. Not the answer she was looking for. Finally, my violent outburst only enhanced my unwanted celebrity, and Sadie's continued absence from school did nothing to help matters. As far as the general school-going public was concerned, she was still missing. I didn't see Jill until lunchtime, and apart from Jeff, none of the others wanted to talk about Sadie. They didn't know anything, and they were sick of talking about the nothing they knew. Jeff intimated that Jill had something big to share, but he didn't want to tell her story without her. The first 4 periods were a blur. It was Stromboli Day, which was one of the few items the cafeteria served that I truly loved. The side was always tater babies, which are just tiny potato wedges, but I loved them more than words can say. Somehow, no potato wedges I have ever had since have matched them. Maybe that's just nostalgia though. As an added bonus, Jeff hated tater babies for some unknowable reason, and always donated his portion to me. I sat at the usual table with all the others. Khalil was telling one of his countless jokes. I missed the body of the joke, but the punchline was, "Hey Murray, I found the guy who crapped in your tuba." It must have been funny too, because everyone within earshot was laughing their asses off. The only one not laughing was Jill, who did not seem to be paying attention. I sat between her and Jeff. Jeff immediately scraped the tater babies off his plate and onto mine. He took a healthy scoop of my chocolate pudding, our long agreed upon payment. Jill didn't seem to want to talk, which confused me. I thought she would be eager to spill her guts, but all I got from her was, "Eat your Stromboli, Paul." I did. I scarfed it down, actually, along with all the tater babies and a soda from the vending machines. She slipped me a note while no one else was paying attention. As discreetly as I could, I read it. The note read, "Meet me by the lockers." Jeff too. if you want. Tell no one. Wait. A couple minutes after I get up, Jill left almost immediately after I read the note, making sure to bus her tray and throw her garbage in the receptacle. It always tickled me that despite her punk affectations, she never lost her good habits. I guess being a punk didn't have to mean being a rude jerk, but it was still amusing. She wore a denim half jacket covered in studs and band patches, and the stitching was immaculate. After downing half of Ashley's Stromboli, I gave Jeff the secret signal to follow me. Never mind what the signal was, it's a secret. I got up and dumped my own tray on the stack. Jeff belched loudly and announced, "Well, I gotta go take a shit. Later, babies." Khalil was halfway through another joke, and no one took much notice of our departure. We met up with Jill by the lockers. The lockers were not our lockers. They were lockers situated in a dark corner of the hallways, a forgotten remnant of an old annex of the school lost years ago in a fire. No one used those lockers, which made the dark corner a perfect place for clandestine meetings, raid, make-out sessions. Jill was waiting for us there, a hollow-eyed wraith lurking in the dim light. "I won't run away with you, Jill," Jeff declared. "My heart belongs to another. I know it hurts now, but someday your heart will mend, my dear." "Shut up, Jeff," Jill hissed. "This is serious, okay?" All right, Jeff answered, holding his palms out and backpedaling in surrender. "So what is this all about?" "It's about Sadie, naturally," Jill replied. "And it's something so freaky and wrong that I figured, Paul, you'd be the only one who would believe me." "So why am I here?" Jeff asked. "Because she knew I'd drag you along anyway," I told him. Jill nodded. "Exactly," she said. "So, Paul, I guess you're wondering why I didn't leave you a letter last night." "I guess I just thought you would see me today," I said. "You're half right," she said, "except I did write you a letter, and I was going to leave it on your window just like before. Before I could, I saw something that made me forget all about my mission, something that made me run straight home and lock the doors, something really freaked up." "What was it?" I asked. She rarely swore. It was just another fun contradiction in her punk rock persona. I could tell this was not the time to tease her about it. "Before I tell you, you gotta promise me two things. You won't laugh at me, and you won't tell the others. Swear on our friendship, or I won't tell you." "Okay," Jeff and I looked at each other, and we didn't need a secret signal to agree to swear by her terms. We raised our right hands, and in perfect unison, we said, "I swear." "Okay," she seemed to gather herself for a moment before speaking again. "So the other two times I delivered the notes, it was between like midnight and 1 a.m. Last night I dozed off, so it wasn't until after 3 that I set out. The neighborhood was damn near pitch black at that point. It was so still I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I didn't think I was feeling any kind of fear or anxiety though, you know. It was still our neighborhood. Well, maybe somewhere deep inside, I was harboring some deep-seated fears of getting caught, because just as I was about to start climbing your tree, I heard a sound, and it just about made me jump out of my skin. It was this horrible yowl, just one yowl, loud and sharp, and suddenly cut off. It came from Sadie's backyard, the other side of the fence. Jeff and I exchanged a glance. The mass of tater babies and stromboli in my stomach lurched in the way that told me I was about to receive terrible news. "So what could I do?" Jill asked. I had to know what made that sound. So I climbed onto the woodpile in your backyard and peered over the fence. That's when I saw her. I saw Sadie. Sadie made the yowl? I asked, flummoxed. No, Jill said, looking paler than ever. The cat did. Ashley's cat, Figaro, made the sound. Sadie was in the backyard, buck naked, filthy, and on all fours. She had Figaro clamped in her jaws by the neck, and the cat's blood was running down her chest. She was eating it. Alive. Jesus Christ, Jeff said. I didn't say anything. I was speechless. My stomach lurched again when I realized I hadn't seen my dog, Buck Biscuits, in a couple of days. I didn't think much of it before, since I'd been spending my days in my room. That's not the worst of it, Jill said, swallowing hard and looking green. We looked at her expectantly. She saw me. I gasped. I couldn't help it. She heard me, and she looked up, looked right into my eyes. She just growled through her teeth and ran back to the house. Her mom opened the door for her. I saw her just for a couple seconds, but she saw me too. She was dressed in rags, hanging off her. She was as filthy as Sadie. She looked like an animal. They both did. God, Jill began sobbing, and Jeff and I held her as the bell rang, signaling the end of the lunch hour. Eventually, we all went to our next classes. I don't remember a bit of it. All I could think about was what Jill told us. I didn't doubt her for a moment. I guess that's why she wanted to tell me. Someone else would assure her that it was all a bad dream or her imagination. Some insulting bullshit like that. Blunt dismissal disguised as comfort. People just refused to believe what they thought should be impossible. I believed Jill, not because I was interested in things people thought were impossible, because she was my friend. The hell of it was this. My belief did not do her a bit of good. Jeff would back us up, even if he didn't fully believe her himself. But that didn't do her any good either. If we told our parents what she saw, they'd be so pissed at her for sneaking out, they wouldn't take a moment to consider what she had to say. We were on our own. Worse than that, we were isolated even from one another after school let out. There was only one thing I could think to do, and that was to catch Jill before her mom came by to pick her up from school. She couldn't go back home. That much was obvious to me. She was in danger. Whatever might be going on with Sadie, Eliza, and her parents, they wouldn't risk her spreading the word around. Well, I knew that plan was shot all to hell when I heard her name paged over the intercom midway through last period. I slapped my forehead, realizing what day it was. Once a month, Jill had a doctor's appointment and had to be pulled out of class early. I'm not sure why she had to go to the doctor every month, she wouldn't say. So much for the running away plan. I caught up with Jeff, waiting for the bus home. I could see that Jill's story affected him just as it did me. I think I mentioned earlier how sweet Jeff was on Sadie, long-standing crush and all that. The idea that she had somehow gone feral, filthy, and carnivorous must have been a hard pill to swallow. Hey, I said, standing beside him. We've got to get her out of there, he said. I agree, I said, relieved that we were on the same page. They saw her. They might come for her next. Jeff turned and looked at me for the first time. His face was naked, damp with sweat, and his eyes were hollow. Not Jill, he said. Sadie. Ever fucked up shit the Carmichaels are up to. Whatever they've been doing to her, it has to stop. Tonight, we'll get her out of the house somehow. Take her to my place. Call the police. Are you with me? Jeff, I said, flabbergasted. This is... you talking about... Sadie was... Jeff grabbed me by the shoulder, his hollow eyes suddenly blazing. Are you with me? He demanded. The bus was pulling up in front of us. What could I say? Jeff was my best friend. If he asked me, I would have followed him into hell. It was so much easier back in those days to see things in black and white terms. You had to back your best friend's play, even if you were terrified. I'm with you, I said. Tonight, was his only reply. The pebble hit my window sometime around 12:45. I was wide awake, fully dressed for nighttime operations, and prepared with a gym bag full of breakout tools. I had no clear idea of what breakout tools might have been, so I grabbed anything that I thought could be useful. I had a couple of flashlights, a heavy-duty pair of bolt cutters, a hacksaw, a crowbar, matches, a throw blanket, and an extra set of clothes, just in case she needed to get dressed on the run. I hoped I wouldn't have to use any of them. As it turned out, I only used one thing, but I'll get to that later. So, a pebble. I leaned out the window and saw the entire crew standing in the shadows. Almost the entire crew. Jeff stood at the forefront, in a balaclava and a turtleneck. He looked like a bank robber, complete with his own bag of tricks. The handle of a baseball bat protruded from the zipper. Ashton and Ashley stood at his right, looking a bit like they were dressed for a gothic dance recital, except for their masks. They just tied black t-shirts around their faces and peeked through the neck hole. It looked ridiculous. Makeshift dance ninjas. Khalil just wore a black t-shirt and gym shorts. No mask. He kept glancing around like he thought someone was watching, but he stood his ground. No jokes this time. I didn't even see his eyes dancing in that way that let me know he had one locked and loaded. Jill was conspicuously absent. As quietly as I could, I climbed out of the window and down the tree. I could hear my parents go to bed hours ago. Both of them thought they had an early morning. Neither of them knew just how early they would be rising. When I hit the ground, I had to ask, "What about Jill? She's not coming." "She's the reason we're all coming," Khalil whispered. "Show him, Jeff." Jeff pulled something out of his back pocket. A folded sheet of notebook paper. He told me, "I found this taped to the outside of her window. She's in trouble, Paul. Here." I took the letter from him and read the contents in the dim light of the street lamp. My stomach tried to lurch, but there was nothing inside to shift. I couldn't eat dinner that night, just played sick and went back up to my room. The letter read, "I'm in trouble. Bad trouble. I don't have much time to write this. I bought some time by spilling a drink on my shirt. I told Mom I had to get changed. I freaked up bad. I told her about Sadie, about last night. She hit the roof, screamed herself hoarse at me, made me call the Carmichaels on speakerphone. Mr. C had that strange, stilted voice, just like Khalil said he wanted me and Mom to come over to talk after dark. After dark. She's making me go. Don't know what's going to happen. If anyone finds this note, help. I'm scared." The letter was simply signed, Jill. I stuffed the letter into my pocket and said, "Come on, we've wasted too much time already." Even in our dark clothes, I felt terribly exposed, crossing from my yard to Sadie's. Suburbia was no place for stealth missions, and with a careless glance out the window by anyone, the jig would quickly be up. The lateness of the hour was our greatest advantage and greatest weakness. Once the trouble began, there would be no one to help us. We had to play it smart. In the shade of Sadie's tree, I motioned everyone to gather for a change of plans. Judging by the wide eyes shining in the moonlight and the shallow, rapid breaths my friends were taking, Everyone was at least as keyed up as I was. "Listen," I whispered. "We can't all go in there. There's too many of us. Too much risk of getting separated. Someone should stay behind as a lookout, and someone should cover the door. Agreed?" "I'm going in there," Jeff said, "no matter what. But maybe you're right. So who stays and who goes?" Ashton and Ashley clasped hands, and in unison they whispered, "We'll stay. Together." I nodded. I knew they would volunteer, and I was glad to be right. I had no desire to put Ashley in danger, and Ashton was smaller than she was, if only a little. "I'm going in," Khalil volunteered. "I'm the biggest one here. If it gets ugly and someone's got to fight off Mr. C, I can do it." I wasn't so sure about that. Khalil may have been big, but I've never seen him get into a fight. Any time he got close, he diffused the situation with a joke and wound up making friends with his would-be opponent. Something told me Mr. Carmichael would not be tranquilized with a quick quip. Still, I didn't argue with him. He was willing to put himself at one hell of a risk for his friends, and that meant a lot to me. "I'm in too. Let's make this quick," I said, already reaching for a tree branch. Jeff stopped me, with a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You stay too, Paul." I tried to protest, but he held up a hand to stop me and said, "You're the backup, just in case shit goes downhill in a bad way. 10 minutes. If we're not out of here with Sadie and Jill in 10 minutes, come in after us. Otherwise, be ready to run. All right?" I wanted to argue, but it was no good. He was right. I might not have been as big as Khalil, but I was sneaky, I was fast, and in a pinch, I had my bag of tricks. Also, I was scared out of my wits, if I'm being totally honest. In light of all that had happened in the last few weeks, the inside of the Carmichael house was a huge and terrifying X factor. So instead of arguing, I nodded and whispered, "Okay, 10 minutes, Jeff. Khalil, stay out of sight. Find Jill. Find Sadie. Grab Sadie, kicking and screaming if necessary, and get the hell out of there. We've all been in that house a million times. You know the quickest way out. If you run into any trouble at all, scream your fucking heads off, okay?" Jeff drew the bat from his own bag of tricks and whispered, "If we run into any trouble, they'll be the ones screaming, courtesy of Mr. Slugger here." But I could see the falseness of the bravado in his eyes and in the slight quaver I detected in his voice. Without another word, he scrambled up the tree to Sadie's bedroom, and Khalil followed quickly behind him. I realized then that surely her window would be locked, and that point of ingress would be closed to us unless Jeff was willing to break a window and possibly alert the entire household. I began to consider other points of entry as the two of them crawled onto the roof and out of my line of sight. My concerns were ill-founded, it seems. I could hear the soft sound of the window sliding up, and a hand extended over the edge of the roof, making an A-OK sign. The hand disappeared again, and they were gone. I checked my watch with its glowing dial, and immediately began to count the minutes down. Under the tree, the three of us crouched in the dirt and waited silently for something terrible to happen. A minute passed. 2 minutes passed. I couldn't breathe. "Is any of this real?" Ashley whispered. I could tell by the ragged edge of her voice that she was crying. "This doesn't feel real. A month ago, this was a boring neighborhood in a boring town, and everything felt real. This feels it feels like a nightmare," Ashton finished. 3 minutes. "Did she really eat Figgy?" Ashley asked. "Was she really running around naked?" "Jill said she did," I said simply. If she said Sadie did those things, I believe her. She wouldn't make that up. I haven't seen Buck around either. I haven't seen any of the neighborhood pets around lately, have you? Ashton asked. Remember at the barbecue? There was like 6 or 7 dogs running around, at least. When was the last time you heard a dog bark? I couldn't remember. I wasn't thinking about it. Unless your neighbor's dog has been barking all day long, you don't think much about the sound after a while. I started, not sure what I was going to say. I thought I heard a sound from inside the house, and my heart jumped into my throat. 4 minutes, 20 seconds. I didn't think I could wait 10 whole minutes to run in after them. My mind raced with 1,000 terrible possibilities of what might be going on in that house. If they screamed, would we hear? Paul, Ashton whispered. Yeah, I answered. This isn't just abuse, is it? It's something worse. Sadie disappeared out of thin air. She was gone. Jeff said something else was in the closet with them that night. What if Sadie didn't come back? What if it just looked like Sadie? What if it was something else? Ashley asked. I didn't answer. There was no answer. 6 minutes. I had to consciously will my feet to stay planted there in the dirt. It was maddening to stay there, asking rhetorical questions and knowing nothing. They say no news is good news, right? Wrong. Whoever they are assholes. No news is torture. But I promised. 10 minutes. I almost lasted 8. And I could wait no longer. I rose to my feet and grabbed my gear bag. Ashley and Ashton looked up at me, looking in that moment more like Hansel and Gretel, lost in the woods, than they did the sinister children of the corn. It's time, I lied. Go wait by the front door and be ready to move. If you don't see us all come running out in the next few minutes, haul ass back home and call the police. If you hear a scream, run home, call the police, okay? Ashton and Ashley stood up immediately. Be careful, they said. I nodded and scrambled up the tree. They were already rounding the corner of the house by the time I hauled myself onto the roof. The window to Sadie's room was a yawning portal into total darkness. To climb through into whatever mysteries were held within was unimaginable, so I climbed through before I could stop to think about it. A charnel house stench pervaded the space where so recently I took the odor of lavender for granted. I smelled rot, blood, and filth mingling in the air among the buzzing of flies. I suppressed the urge to gag for fear that the sound would alert the things that once were the Carmichaels. The room, so far as I could tell in the dim light of the moon, was utterly trashed, nearly unrecognizable. It looked like an angry bull had been set loose in the room, bucking and butting at everything in its path. Sadie's vanity and dresser appeared to have been flung across the room and crushed. Her bedding was ripped to shreds and streaked with some dark, reeking matter. The closet, I noticed, stood open. That rectangle of a darker blackness in the gloom filled me with unspeakable dread. In some way I would never fully understand. Something in there was the source of a horror that fell over our cul-de-sac and altered our lives forever. That something had been there from the beginning, waiting for the right moment. Sadie told us so. She thought it was a ghost lurking in the walls. How could she have known how much worse it could be? How could she know she would lose herself? What was this bloodthirsty feral beast Jill saw hunting naked in the moonlight? How could she become a thing like that? Could she still be saved? The answer wasn't here in her bedroom. I knew that. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to venture into the halls, had to search for my lost friends. What I would do if the Carmichaels found me first. I had no idea. I held no illusions that the encounter would be a friendly one. As slowly and quietly as I could manage, I opened Sadie's door. When I found myself under no immediate attack, I dared to poke my head through the gap. The hallway was lit only by the few doors that stood open, pillars of dim light provided by the curtained windows. I reached into my bag for the flashlight, only to realize I didn't dare use it. I would be shining a beacon to lead them to me. My only answer was to crawl low against the wall and try to let my eyes adjust to the darkness. The trouble with that was the risk of finding something that had already adjusted before I could. The other trouble was, now that I was here, I had no idea where to look. I guess if I had any expectations of what would happen when I entered the house, it was to follow the sounds of a struggle and run toward it. Apart from the ever-present buzzing of the flies, the house was completely silent. I hoped that was good news. It could have meant that Khalil and Jeff were never discovered, and that they too were still in the house somewhere stealthily searching for Jill and Sadie. I tried to hope that was good news, but the silence brought no such comfort. The silence was the sound of doom. I had to get moving. The house was huge. My friends and the Carmichaels could be anywhere within. If they already managed to save Jill and Sadie, would I even know? I needed to find them fast. I needed to be planning ahead for our escape. A gut feeling told me the living room and foyer were the greatest danger zones. If the front door was unguarded, we could simply dash through to the outside. It wouldn't be that easy. The basement had a storm door that led outside too, but we would have to pass through the entire house again to reach it. The back door led to the fenced-in yard. I knew from experience that Mr. Carmichael left the gate padlocked at night. We might be able to scramble over the fence, but only if no one was injured. If we were being chased, the attempt would cost us precious seconds. I grimaced in the darkness. A conflict seemed inevitable. If we were all together again, I would feel better about my chances. I had to find Khalil and Jeff. Why was it so dark? Who turned out all the lights? Enough with the hypothetical questions, I thought. I've got to get moving. I crawled instinctively toward the first pillar of light, the first open door. It was a guest bedroom. The top floor had 4 bedrooms, including the master bedroom with its adjoining bathroom, Sadie's room, Eliza's room at the end of the hall, and this one. I slept there once when my parents were out of town. Mr. Carmichael sometimes slept in the downstairs bedroom when he and Mrs. Carmichael were fighting. Sadie told me so at some point. The stench was worse in the guest bedroom. Fresh, raw, and wet. The buzzing of flies was so loud that it was like television static. I should have left, but something drew me inside. Curiosity, maybe, and never mind what it did to the cat. I crawled through the doorway, measuring every movement with the care of a bomb disposal technician. I noticed the carpet was tacky wet, as if something had spilled there, and no one tried to clean it up. I could see the spill had originated on the bed. Something was bound there with ropes that now hung limply from the head and footboard. Something that fascinated the swarms of flies. I tried to swallow, but my throat had closed to a pinhole. Have you ever tried to rise while every instinct you had screamed at you to stay on the floor? I felt like Gulliver when he was tied to the ground by the Lilliputians. When I finally found my feet, I beheld a gruesome sight. Something had died on that bed, died terribly. The sheets and mattress were so saturated with blood that it pooled on the surface like stagnant ponds in some hellish landscape. Bits of torn flesh and gnawed splinters of bone were all that remained of what was once a living thing. My frantic mind tried to dance around the truth and failed. The living thing must have been a human being. The ropes were spread too far apart for it to have been anything else short of a gigantic dog, and there was no fur. Jesus Christ, I whispered. What have they done? Who's there? A voice hissed from somewhere in the room. Panic flared in my chest so brightly that I thought for an instant I was having a heart attack. It was a miracle that I was too choked up to scream. The sound came from behind a heavy wardrobe. There was a closet there, I remembered. Jill? I whispered, realizing I recognized the voice once my heart stopped pounding quite so hard. Is that you? Paul, she whispered back. Oh, thank God. Quick, let me out of here before they come back. Yeah, hold on, I whispered, feeling terribly exposed with the light from the window and the open door at my back. I pushed the wardrobe aside just enough for a skinny girl to be able to slip through the gap. Jill squirmed through, and we both ducked down behind the bed. Did you see them? She asked me. Not yet, I answered. They're not human. They've changed. Sadie, too. They stuffed me in the closet and made me listen when they... We need to leave, now. Oh, we can't. Khalil and Jeff are in here somewhere. Frick, Jill hissed. Those things must have seen them. That's why they ran out of here in such a hurry. Which way did they go? I asked. They went downstairs, I think, she whispered. I could hear their footsteps thumping on the staircase. I could hear something else thumping down the stairs too. Something heavy. Her eyes darted to the bed, and I knew at once what she meant. We've got to go after them, I said, taking her hand. It was slick with sweat, just like my own. Yeah, she said, rising to follow me. But what are we going to do when we find them? I don't know, I told her, thinking for some reason honesty was still the best policy in this situation. I'm kind of hoping I'll think of something by then. Frick, she whispered, but she didn't let go of my hand either. She didn't run for Sadie's window. Like myself, she was too concerned about the safety of her friends to give in to fear. Unlike myself, she saw what they had become and witnessed the grisly death of her own mother. Her courage was not tempered by ignorance like mine was. I'll never forget about that. Jill and I crept down that pitch-black and seemingly endless hallway, pressed against the wall as if an endless precipice yawned through the center in place of the once plush carpeting. In the pillars of light projected from the doorways, we could see that the carpet was saturated with reeking filth. Debris littered a home that was once kept immaculate by a team of maids, hired twice a month by Mr. Carmichael to scrub the place from top to bottom. It now looked more like the den of a rabid bear than the home of a well-to-do suburban family. I could feel deep gouges in the walls that reinforced that image. What else could have done that, if not a wild animal? I wondered at the devolution, the decadence in the truest sense of the word that befell my friend's family. What could have happened to them? To Sadie? Where did she go when she disappeared? How could all this have happened in the space of a few days? When we found her in the closet, everything else seemed normal. There was no sense or reason to any of this. As terrified as I was perhaps equally sorrowful. How could our lives return to any sense of normality after tonight? How could I look out my window and see this house and ever know peace? It seemed impossible. At the end of the hall was a sunroom where we used to play as kids. Beyond that was the landing. Once, when I was about 5, I wandered out of the sunroom, climbed over the baby gate, and fell down the stairs. I wasn't badly hurt, but I was frightened and bowled my head off. After that, the sunroom was converted into its current purpose by Mrs. Carmichael. She raised a miniature garden of potted plants there and doted on them with as much, or perhaps even more care than she devoted to her own children. The curtains were all drawn now, just as they were in the rest of the house. Whatever had become of the Carmichaels, they had the presence of mind to hide their activities from the outside world. Or, I supposed, they simply grew to shun the light like vampires and other unholy things. I wasn't sure. The plants had all been upended from their pots, torn to bits, and strewn about the floor of the sunroom. I could only just see them in the gloom, and took great care to avoid stepping on anything that could make a sound. You could tell Jill was doing the same. She still held my hand, but I could feel her jerking away as she dodged all the detritus. She pulled her head slightly and released my hand when I paused to adjust my bag. It was digging into my shoulder and growing uncomfortable, but I refused to leave it behind. I still harbored some hope that the contents would help us along the way. My eyes were finally starting to adjust to the inky blackness of the house. I could just make her out ahead of me, creeping toward a door I perceived as a narrow, darker strip in the surrounding darkness. It must have been merely ajar, and not standing wide open. Jill paused at the doorway, daring only to open the door, wide enough that we could pass, and peered through. I saw her go rigid. She turned to me as I stepped closer, only a couple of paces behind. Her eyes were as wide as coasters, and she rose a single finger to her lips. "Quiet," she mouthed. When I reached the door, she stepped aside so I could see what was the matter. Above the landing, a pair of skylights allowed a meager illumination. It was just enough to allow me to see her, standing perfectly still, just at the top of the stairs. It must have been Eliza. I could tell that from her size and build. She was only slightly more defined than a solid shadow from the distance from which I watched her. She appeared to be nude, or nearly so. Something seemed to be hanging from her back, like a ragged cloak. The remains of her blouse, perhaps. I could smell her, a wild animal reek of sweat, blood, and shit. As I stood there wondering what we could do, she cocked her head back and sniffed at the air. I could hear the sharp inhalations. She began to turn, and I could see the greenish gleam of her eyes, shining in the darkness like a coyote's. I ducked behind the door before those strange eyes could be trained on me. "Who is there?" she said. It sounded more like an animal's cry than human speech, except I could still hear a glimmer of Eliza's voice under the harsh tones. I glanced over at Jill, still wide eyes and flared nostrils. She pressed herself against the wall so hard I thought she was trying to slip through. In this strange house, I guess it wasn't impossible. Out in the landing, I could hear slow footsteps approaching, and that awful bloodhound snuffling. "Run," I mouthed to Jill. She just shook her head. She didn't seem to be able to will her limbs into moving. Neither could I, for that matter. I reached into my bag, hoping something therein could be used as a weapon. If only I could have gotten my dad's gun. My hand closed over something cold and metallic, hexagonal. The crowbar? It would have to do. Maybe I could buy enough time for Jill to make a run for it. Slowly as I could manage, for fear of triggering the Eliza thing into action by making a sound, I drew the crowbar out of the bag. Her hand wrapped around the edge of the door. Her grimy fingers were tipped in thick, sharp, grotesquely long nails like talons. I held my breath. From somewhere below us, a terrible, ululating screech tore through the silence of the house like an air raid siren. I couldn't tell if it was a cry of fear or of rage, but whatever it was, the Eliza thing found it more interesting than us. She stomped away and down the stairs, making some kind of glottal noise in her throat. Simultaneously, Jill and I released a ragged sigh of relief. The relief was only temporary, of course. Jill said it before I could. We have to follow her. So, let's go, I said, pursuing, gripping the tire iron in my left hand. What good would it be against 4 of those things? Best not to think about it. Abandoning caution, Jill and I dashed through the door before rational thought could freeze our legs in place. If our friends were down there, they did not have much time. The Eliza thing was already out of sight. We, the quarry, forgotten. At the bottom of the stairs, I held Jill back and we stopped to listen. The silence of the house was broken, perhaps for good. Now we could hear the sounds of crashing screams and animalistic cries rang out from every which way. The ground floor was darker than upstairs, if such a thing was possible. Jill and I knew the house well, but not well enough to chase those things blindly. Here, hold this for a second, told Jill, thrusting the crowbar into her hands. She took the bar from me silently, breathing hard. I reached into the bag and fished out the 2 flashlights. At least I knew the batteries were good. They came new, from the pack, in the junk drawer. No horror movie cliché of the flickering flashlights for us. In the flashlight's beam, saw Jill clearly for the first time since we parted ways at school this afternoon, hundreds of years ago. Her eyeliner streaked down her face in runners of dried tears, and her chin-length hair ran wild. Her expression was one of fierce determination. She looked nothing like a quiet middle school student, and all the world like a Valkyrie of Nordic legend. She held the crowbar in a white-knuckle grip, like she was itching to use it on someone. A thunderous crash reverberated through the house, sounding closer than ever. I forgot all about trading the crowbar for my extra flashlight. "Let's go," Joe hissed through clenched teeth. "Yeah," I said, wishing I felt as eager to catch up with those fiends as she seemed to be. We dashed off in the direction of the crash, through halls that lost all familiarity and grew somehow labyrinthine with my growing panic. Behind every closed door and blind corner, I expected a blood-crazed horror to spring forth and seize the 2 of us in its terrible claws. Still, we saw nothing, or nothing living at least. We could hear them, grunting, screeching, and making some awful coughing sound I thought to be some species of laughter. Jeff and Khalil were running for their lives, and these things were making a sport of it. My only comfort in this breathless chase was the glimmer of hope that my friends were still alive. For now, Jill and I burst through another door, and immediately we were assailed, not by the Carmichaels, but by a stench so unbelievably foul, I had to reevaluate my definition of foulness on the spot. We found the kitchen. Finally, I retched, vomiting hot bile from an empty stomach. From just behind me, I could hear Jill doing the same. The least of the problem seemed to be the refrigerator. It stood open, the motor long since burned out. The food that remained within had putrefied and was busy with flies and maggots. What could be seen had molded beyond recognition. Some blackish slime seeped onto the floor in a viscous puddle. The worst of it was spread out over the dining room table, the countertops, and littered the floor in festering mounds. We would have to step through it to cross into the next room. Carcasses and pieces of carcasses. Every pet in the neighborhood must have been present. Most of them had been eaten, guts and all. Bones, ragged pelts, and spilled blood were all that remained. Some of them had apparently been left for later consumption, but had grown rancid and bloated in the lingering heat of summer. My buck was one of these. I saw him last, sprawled out by the microwave. Those monsters tore his throat out, and his final terror was frozen in his face. "Buck," I whispered, ears stinging my eyes. "Bucky, oh damn it. What have they done to you, Buck?" I turned back to Jill, perhaps seeking comfort, and found her frozen by grief far greater than my own. It was her mother, stripped naked, murdered, tossed carelessly into the corner of the kitchen. She had been bitten to death. All over her body were the sort of awful, ragged wounds that could only have been caused by many sets of teeth and deep crescent-shaped gouges that must have been created by fingernails. What remained of her face was contorted in a rictus of agony. Her skin was torn at the wrists and ankles from her final struggles. Coagulating blood seeped from the countless wounds. I held on to Jill, tears running down my face, and, as a small blessing, blurring my vision, I had no words, nothing to comfort my friend. Her mother was one of the kindest, most loving people I had ever known. She didn't deserve this. "They made me listen," Jill said. "They locked me in that closet and made me listen while they tore her apart. They made me listen while they ate her alive. I had to listen to her scream, and I couldn't help her." Tears flowed from her eyes freely, and though her expression was one of unfathomable grief, below the surface and in her voice was a stronger emotion still. Rage. "We've got to go, Paul," she insisted, grabbing the spare flashlight that hung out of my hip pocket. "We can't let those things do this to Khalil and Jeff." I stammered, swallowing hard. My mouth tasted sour, bitter. "Fuck. Come on then, let's go get them and get the fuck out of here." The next sound seemed to come from the way we came, sparing us from trudging through the waste any further. We spun on our heels and dashed back through the door, slamming it shut behind us. Jill took the lead this time, her flashlight swiping left to right in search of some sign of our destination. We found the foyer next, and I noticed, to my dismay, that the door had been nailed shut with heavy boards. We would not be leaving this way. I cursed under my breath, knowing that the back door and the storm doors would likely be sealed shut as well. Trapped. We were trapped in here. Jill was already crossing into the living room, and I dashed after her for fear of being left behind. There we were presented with 3 options: 2 more halls and the staircase that dog-legged off the hall to the left. "Which way?" I asked. "Shh," she answered. "Listen." I listened, but only for the briefest moment. That was when something stumbled through the hallway and fell at our feet, screaming and clawing at our pant legs. I shrieked and kicked at the thing until Jill illuminated the creature with her flashlight. It was no creature at all. It was Khalil. He was bruised, bloodied, terrified, and still alive. "Khalil!" I cried, pulling him to his feet. "Thank Christ you're alive." Jill bear-hugged the hyperventilating Khalil and kissed him on the cheek. Khalil pulled away. "We've got to get out of here, guys," he cried, his eyes darting every which way. "Wait," Jill demanded. "Where's Jeff?" "They grabbed him," Khalil said, tears running down his face. They grabbed hold of him, and I just ran. He screamed and screamed, and I didn't help him. Fuck, man. I just ran. Oh, damn. We can't just leave him, Joe cried. He might still be alive. We can still save him. He lives, but you can't, Savim, barked an awful voice from behind us. I whipped around and shone my flashlight on the source of that strange voice. I shone my light on Sadie. What once was Sadie? I looked upon that twisted thing that Sadie had become, and I realized something for the first time in my young life. Until that moment, I had harbored a secret hope that Sadie and her family could be saved. I still held to that fairy tale belief that the spell might be broken and everything would go back to normal. I realized at that moment that things didn't always turn out okay. Sometimes things ended as badly as they possibly could. Sometimes darkness won the day. The thing that stood in the archway held only a superficial resemblance to the sweet, pretty girl Sadie used to be. Her body had become a pale, fun house distortion, too long of torso and limb, her posture crooked and stooped. Those breasts the schoolboys coveted hung withered and wrinkled on her emaciated chest. Swishing left and right behind her was a strange fleshy tail. From her back fluttered bizarre diaphanous wings, like those of a wasp. Her two long fingers ended in filthy, yellowed hooks, and her feet came to resemble the cloven hooves of a pig. Her legs were streaked with blood and shit. The worst of the changes were in her face. Her ears grew long and pointed, and her hair fell out in clumps. Her eyes shone like Halloween lamps, green and eldritch. Not a glimmer of humanity remained in those luminous orbs. Her nose receded to gaping wet slits like the nose of a bat. Her teeth grew jagged, brown, and far too large for her jaws. It looked like the mouth of those ghastly deep-sea fish, with the glowing lure hanging from their foreheads. Gore clung between those teeth, and saliva ran freely from her shredded lips. God, I gasped. Sadie, what have you become? A voice from the other hall answered. Be coming. Soon. It was Mrs. Carmichael. She held a butcher knife in a clawed hand. The Eliza thing stood by her side, grinning a needle-toothed grin. Need food, meat, eat the Ange needs. A third voice, standing at the stairs. It was Mr. Carmichael. Or it was. He held Jeff by the back of his turtleneck sweater. Jeff appeared to be breathing, but was unconscious. He stepped closer to us. Sadie, Eliza, and Mrs. Carmichael all did the same. We were surrounded. We were going to die. Let us go, Khalil cried. Can't, won't. The Mr. Carmichael thing grunted. His transformation did not seem as advanced as Sadie's, but his face had the empty, savage dullness of a feral animal. Lured, here. The Eliza thing tittered. Like cows, cattle, together. Enough. To become. Soon, ow. No escape. The Mrs. Carmichael thing growled. She raised the meat cleaver, now only a few steps away. I was frozen there. Useless. All of my childish plans for a daring rescue came to this single moment, and I choked. We were going to die, and we would die in the most grisly way imaginable. One by one, they would rip us apart with their jagged maws to feed some bizarre metamorphosis. I could do nothing. Nothing. Someone pushed me to the ground and split the air with a wild cry of fury. It was Jill. 6 sets of eyes locked upon that 13-year-old, a 5'2", 80-pound Hellcat holding a crowbar aloft. She charged at Mr. Carmichael, screaming what might have been her first swear word. Let him go, motherfucker. She swung the crowbar with all her might, hard enough that I could hear it cut the air. With superhuman reflexes, the Mr. Carmichael thing caught the cast-iron crowbar in mid-swing, and he promptly burst into flames. The flame flared at his hand and spread wildfire down his arm and beyond, until the thing that once was a man was engulfed entirely. It released Jeff and flailed away, emitting an unearthly scream. The other fiends stood dumbfounded around us, if only for a moment. Jill, our savior, would not allow them the moment to recover. She still held the crowbar and charged the others, swinging wildly and landing glancing blows that flared like shooting stars in the darkness. "Get it away!" the Sadie thing bellowed, even as the flames began to spread across her shoulders and engulf her grotesque vestigial wings. They scattered, leaving behind them snaking trails of fire in the carpet and the drapes. Khalil and I were frozen still in shock, Jeff only beginning to come to. Jill was still vibrant and alive, more so than I ever saw her. Energy seemed to radiate from her in waves, like a miniature sun. "Oh, let's go," she cried, waving us along as the flames began to spread and the smoke billowed. Khalil and I followed, pulling Jeff to his feet and half dragging him up the stairs after Jill. Sadie's window was still the best way out. One by one, we crawled through that portal, choking on smoke, one last time. Ashley and Ashton had already fled, having followed my instructions to leave and call the cops. By the time the police and the firemen arrived, the flames had engulfed the entire house. They managed to extinguish the blaze before it spread to the other homes, but the Carmichael house burned to the ground. Thank God there were no survivors. The final cause of the blaze was officially determined to be an electrical malfunction. Unofficially, the investigators were baffled. There did not seem to be any obvious source or rational explanation for the fire. A couple of times, I heard the phrase spontaneous human combustion bandied about. Unofficially, I know the investigators found the remains of all those partially consumed animals in the rubble, along with the charred corpse of Jill's mother. I know they found evidence of cannibalism in the autopsy. I know that the blackened skeletons of the Carmichael family were found to be strangely deformed, even apparently possessing extra bones. The adults never grasped the enormity of what had transpired, but they knew enough to want the truth safely suppressed. I know none of those things made it into a police report. Money changed hands. Lots of money. Mr. Watkins was a lawyer and the executor of the Carmichael estate. Mrs. Valentine was a notary public. Forgeries were made. The police station was renovated, and the fire department got that new fire truck they were hankering for. As far as the media knew, it was a tragic but essentially mundane house fire. No one talked about what happened that awful night in the late summer. Eventually, I stopped trying to bring it up. The Carmichael lot stayed empty for at least as long as any of us lived there. A few interested parties came to inquire about the lot, but they were firmly discouraged. One by one, we all began to drift away. Jill and her father were the first to go. He had a job opportunity in Silicon Valley, and he was glad to leave the tragedy and the mystery of his wife's death behind. The Valentines were next, followed shortly thereafter by the Watkins family. My parents sold our house 2 months after I went away to college. I haven't been back there since. For ages, I searched for some kind of rational explanation for what happened that night. I scoured the libraries and later the internet for some precedent, anything that could give me some manner of closure. Eventually, I found something. Indulge me for a moment as I relate to this old fable. Once upon a time, a baby was born to a loving couple. That baby was perhaps the most beautiful baby ever born, and the couple loved her dearly. They were, for a brief time, desperately happy. The love and devotion this man and woman showered upon their progeny attracted the attention of the fey magical creatures of the wilderness. They conspired to replace the baby with one of their own, to be raised by the couple in the child's stead. The couple suspected nothing and raised the impostor as their own. In time, however, the child grew strange, savage, and deformed. It tormented the couple to their wits' end, but they tried to love the child all the same. For their pains, the pretender only bedeviled them further. One day, a traveling blacksmith happened by their humble cottage, and, seeing the horrid child, knew it at once for what it was. He told the married couple their child was a changeling, one of the fairy folk, and he knew how to prove it. He pulled from his tool belt an iron sledge. The child was cowed at once, but the blacksmith was not satisfied. He pressed the iron head of the hammer against the child's forehead, where it burned as if red hot. The changeling fled for the land of fairy, for the strange folk held a peculiar aversion to iron and feared it above all else. The next day the couple's true daughter was returned to them, and they all lived happily ever after. Stories just like that could be found all over Europe in the olden days. From what I read, the accepted explanation for this phenomenon was simple ignorance. They had no scientific explanation for deformities, mental illnesses, and birth defects, and attached to them a supernatural rationale. Here, with hundreds of years of learning on our side, it's easy to dismiss the ideas of changelings and fae. For most people, it would be easy to dismiss. Most people did not have a door to the fairy in their closets, and did not know anyone who did. And that's for the best. The doorway we found in my friend's closet that night robbed us forever of friends, family, and the ability to believe in a sane and structured world. 26 years have passed, and the nightmares have never left me. Again and again, I dream of wandering alone through those dark, hot, reeking hallways, knowing something terrible is coming. I've lost count of the times I found myself awake in the middle of the night, soaked in a cold sweat. Some nights, I swear I can hear whispers in the walls, but it must be my imagination. It must be. I haven't opened my closet in weeks,